You.
Good afternoon, Dr. Hinshaw. Good afternoon to you, Ania, as well. Also in Romania, we are in the evening. It's very interesting this zone difference between us, between Romania and the United States of America. Thank you, Dr. Hinshaw, for having accepted our invitation, our interview request. We would like to discuss with you this evening the significance of spirituality in the contemporary society in which we are living. Because we should take into account the pragmatic dimension of our society, the fact that generally speaking, people don't want to have a strong connection to spirituality. Of course, I wouldn't have an explanation from this point of view. And my first question would be the following one. Why do you think is this disconnection in our times between contemporary society and spirituality?
Well, that's a big question. I think that one of the things that comes to mind that is a good maybe metaphor or an image to keep, and this is the what I often call the Martha Mary conundrum. So that in the New Testament, there's the story of Christ who had close friends at the town of Bethany, two sisters and their brother Lazarus, who had died and was raised from the dead by Christ. But at one point in the gospel, it speaks specifically of Martha being very busy doing all sorts of things, and Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus, and apparently just being, almost sort of in two different ontological states, if you will. One is just being very, very busy, being just highly distractible, and the other one being very focused on what Christ himself said, the one needful thing, which I think is to be with God, to be with the divine, to be aware, and the tradition in Christian spirituality is a focus on being continually in a state of prayer. And how do a lot of the fathers define this? I think one of the definitions is being continually aware of God, of the presence of God. And as we had spoken earlier, it is the God who is inside us. It's not some remote, up there or out there or some kind of spatial geometrical kind of arrangement. It is in this macrocosmos, where the spiritual, immaterial, and the material are wedded together, this unique connection that is found in the human creature, who is self-aware, who is conscious, where the encounter with God is most intense or the most possible. Although we, pray that God is everywhere, filling all things, and so this is the sense of the spirituality that's there. Now, the problem, I think, for most of us, including me, through most of my life, is we go about our business. All of our lives are directed towards some kind of progress. I talked about how the idea of progress is pernicious or a negative notion. But obviously it's not entirely negative. I mean, we try to progress in some kind of positive light. The question is, what is positive? What is positive about our changes that occur through our lives? And most of what we associate with progress, though, is achieving material well-being. And yet we're all headed to the grave, and this is the dilemma. So human beings typically don't want to think about our ultimate destination. They want to think about things on the way, and hopefully we'll find a nice home, we'll have a good profession, stable income, maybe a family, a good relationship with a spouse, etc. And yet and we're always in the background, always threatening this is the suffering nature of humanity, and the suffering is essentially a prelude to our mortality. And so I think it's a simple thing, if it's a sad thing, but it's understandable how we would substitute lesser goods for the greater good, because the greater good, again, from a Christian perspective, takes us through the cross. There's no way a Christian can escape in terms of a journey toward the divine, toward union with the divine, except through the cross of Christ, through suffering, through death. And that's a bitter pill to swallow when we live in a world that is dominated by consumerist kinds of images. There are very few moments, I think, in a day where we're not bombarded either indirectly or directly through the media that we depend upon with advertisements about, you take this, you buy this, you get this, and it's going to make you happy. And so it's this sort of continual distraction by substitute material objects, which really, in a sense, are, as St. Maximus would say, journeys toward non-being, away from real being, or an encounter with real being. If you look at the icon, for example, of Christ the Pantocrator, or where in his halo, the Greek participle haon means the one who is. God is existence, is reality, and so that is what. But the God that is reality, at least for Christians, is also the God who suffers and who embraces suffering and who actually transforms death as a means to finding real life, real meaningful life. And so when someone is stuck, or not stuck, but cannot avoid a confrontation with suffering, either because of some crisis in one's life, each one of those encounters, or maybe a huge natural catastrophe, or a war, or some other disaster, either external to the self, or maybe some serious illness threatening one's life. All of those are encounters with that sort of shake us away from this sort of, we're on this kind of treadmill taking us toward prosperity or toward material well-being, but it's a false understanding. I mean, that's what these other things are sort of shaking us and saying, wait a minute, think about reality.
So a wonderful answer, as I expected. Now I would have a general question, but very important for our viewers and readers. Dr. Hinshaw, I would like you to let us know what was the reason why you made the decision to become a physician. I know very well you are one of the most well-known physicians in the United States. At the same time, you are specialized in palliative medicine, and it would be outstanding if you could speak about this medical field as well, because we are very curious to find out some more information about it. But first of all, do let us know, please, what was the reason why you wanted to become a physician? Maybe because you were impressed by the nature of suffering?
Well, it's an interesting question. I wonder sometimes, as I think back on my life, when I was a child or early adolescent, I really had almost no interest in medicine. Although my father was a physician and certainly admired what he did, but I didn't connect with it necessarily. But I had an extraordinary opportunity as a 13-year-old to travel with him when he was and with my mother and older sister. We went as a family. He was a visiting professor at a large medical school in South America. And so this was a very different culture to suddenly be submerged in as an American growing up in a middle class comfortable kind of environment. And what was striking was that in Lima, Peru, which is where we were at the University of San Marcos, I don't know if this is entirely true now, but at least at that time, the poor lived in the suburbs. They lived outside the city. And the young physicians who were in training, who my father was teaching, invited us to go with them because they had a mission outside of the central part of Lima, the capital, in one of these poor suburbs. It was basically a hut city. They were made up of paper, cardboard houses, no running water. People were extremely impoverished. There were about 60,000 people, if I recall. And the interesting thing was that they had named their slum the Ciudad de Dios, the city of God. So and in the middle of the slum, they had a church, a Catholic church, which was not real fancy, but it was nice. It was the one bright spot in the whole world in which these very poor people lived, and it was their church, and it was. I had never come so close to touching in extreme poverty, extreme suffering, or smelling it, or seeing it and being immersed in it, and that shook me up. I mean, as a 13-year-old, it was like, wow, I didn't even realize this other part of the world lived. How other people in the world lived, and I came away from the trip thinking, I can't. I have to do something about it. And medicine seemed like a very practical way, because I was seeing these young physicians volunteering their time there. They had a free clinic and they were helping the people. And I admired that, and I wanted to do something like that. And that was my initial motivation, I think, to pursue medicine. I mean, otherwise I was interested in becoming a historian. I mean, that was my avocation, my thing that gave me intellectual pleasure was history, but I still find history very interesting and pursue that. But medicine became something that I felt like I had to do. That I had to acquire these skills so that I would help people in some way. Now, actually, when I ended up becoming a physician, I was sort of, well, maybe this is too strong, but I'll use the word seduced, I guess, a little bit by the idea that as a surgeon, and my father was a surgeon, I admired what he did, but I was going to fix problems. I was going to, be able to have a direct impact on human suffering by operating and so forth. And so I was actually trained as a surgeon. And so in the late 1970s, when I finished medical school, I went on and was trained in surgery. There was nothing like palliative medicine at that time in the United States. Modern hospice, the first modern hospice in the United States was founded right before I started medical school, it was 1974. So that was in Connecticut. So there's almost nothing. Cicely Saunders had just opened her hospice, St. Christopher's, in 1968 or 67. So in London. So there was nothing really that I was even aware of at that point. And I'm not sure I would have been ready for it. I mean, it was later that I began to wonder, and it was part of a spiritual journey towards becoming Orthodox, I think, too. I think the journey toward the Eastern Church was very crucial for both my wife and for me to kind of rethink about, what is medicine? What is the nature of healing? Is healing the same thing as curing disease? And because I was really intoxicated initially in my career on the idea of curing diseases, but I certainly didn't cure every disease. I sometimes made people suffer more because I operated on them. I mean, I might have taken away their cancer, but then they had pain afterwards, and I didn't really know how to deal with that. So all of these kinds of deeper existential questions about, what is the nature of healing as opposed to curing, and how does that interface with death? Is it possible, for example, for someone who is dying to actually experience healing? I mean, that was an extraordinary kind of revelation to see that, kind of sense it in some encounters with patients, and then begin to read. So by the latter part of the 1990s, I was working as a hospital administrator. I was running the clinical affairs at our hospital. I began to think about it in this larger sense, and I realized I wanted to kind of help address the imbalance between this sort of curative focus on disease and the idea of relieving human suffering. At the same time, my wife, who was trained as a psychiatrist, had been caring for patients with HIV/AIDS, and in early in the 1990s, it was a death sentence. I mean, almost every patient she saw, she was providing the mental health services for these people. They had to deal with death, and a lot of them actually grew up. I mean, these are people sometimes who had very wild kind of lives, and they matured very quickly as they were facing their death. And so that was an extraordinary thing to witness from her accounts of encounters with patients, where she was seeing this remarkable personal growth, often not just at a psychological level, but also at a spiritual level.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hinshaw, for your wide-ranging response. Ania, please, if you want to ask something, you have the word.
In regards to what he said right now, or in general?
General.
I was wondering, so you've repeated a lot of times that suffering is an intrinsical part of life, and I guess that relates to maturity, because people nowadays cannot deal with that, and they remain kind of children throughout their adult lives, and religion kind of mediates that, or it creates the connection, a maturity.
Or at least it has the potential. Maybe
it has the potential.
It could also be like an anesthetic, and you sort of go through the ritual and not really grow.
Yes. The question was if there was anything apart from religion that could do that, but I agree so much with your observations. I feel like so many people who practice religion do it out of fear of anything else, or out of obligation, or a sense of anesthetic, as you said, of all of these questions that they cannot answer for themselves. And is it really helping them? And are we just building an institution that helps them, not religion themselves?
Yeah, I mean, this is the interesting question about institutional faith is waning in the West. I mean, the numbers of people who fill out population-based surveys, regarding religious demographics, more and more are just saying none. I have no religious affiliation. What's interesting, though, is that many of the ones who fill out that same category, they say I have no religious affiliation. Many of those are still open to the question of there may be a God, or there may be something higher. And so it's an interesting question, because I think it fits with the postmodernity again. People are very individualistic, and they can say, well, how can my being accountable in some kind of larger community be meaningful or even relevant? And I think the fact that we're seeing our civic populations being torn apart by hyperpolarization is a symptom of this, because people still need to be part of some kind of body, and they substitute politics for it, and they want certainty. That's one of the things in my encounter with dying, or people facing their death potentially, facing a potential terminal illness. The thing that really drives everybody nuts, they get very anxious about it, is uncertainty. I've had patients sometimes tell me, even when I gave them very bad news, I said, I think you're close to death, or I think that you have maybe a few months left. They actually sometimes look relieved, because they say, oh, well, now I know what I'm dealing with. It's more this issue of sort of, what are all these possibilities out there? I don't know what I'm dealing with, and the uncertainty. And the same thing, I think, applies to being part of some kind of a group identity, where you have this sense of certainty. But the only certainty we have as part of the body of Christ, in the traditional Christian sense, is that God has done everything possible to save us. That God, if God's will is that everyone would be saved, but we also have freedom, and we have to make some effort. We have to, the Greek word synergeia, we have to make some kind of synergy with God to transition, to move toward him. I mean, we're either moving toward being or toward non-being. And there's a very interesting image, and this is from I think a 5th century father of the church, St. Dorotheos of Gaza. And he describes a circle, and in the very center of the circle is God. And then at any point along the circle, it represents points which could be any of us. And as we move toward the center, toward God, of course, other people on that same circle are moving toward God. And so we're all getting closer to each other. And it's that interdependence that is what I think is so beautiful about that geometric image that Dorotheos describes. 1,500 years ago, he has this image. And because as we get closer and closer to God, we can only facilitate that closeness by our interconnectedness with each other. So I think when we see these very powerful kinds of movements toward, trying to protect the planet or other causes, I mean, this is this deep spiritual yearning that is coming, I think, through from the Holy Spirit, moving in people who are otherwise secular. They don't know how to express but they want to make a difference, and I think in some sense, if it could be turned into a very positive, rather than a divisive way, it could be building up, relationships between human beings. I mean, we all have, this is our only home we have, this planet. If we destroy it, I mean, it's a great sin for Christians to be participating in something destructive like this. And at the same time, it's also something very holy if we do something to preserve it, to try to, it becomes a part of the sacramental life, the mystery, the life of the mysteries. So.
Okay, Ania, if you have another question, please go ahead. You are free to address any question you want.
The moment you say that, I forget all of my questions. I was talking with Petcu about something in one of our conversations, but I forgot what I wanted to refer to. Oh, we were talking about the fact that when you reject spirituality, the spirituality within you doesn't dissipate, like it doesn't disintegrate into nothing, and it focuses on other objects. And I was kind of thinking like the psychological torment someone has to go through when they project all of their spirituality into so many different causes that continuously shift along with social media, and the horrible tension that builds up within people. Because when you see like teenagers nowadays, they don't reject spirituality, they create all of these new spiritualities. I don't know if you've seen them, but like paganism, and we're going to crystals and all of these things. And it's clear that people have this horrible need to point their suffering into, as you said, a certainty. And I don't know what the question is.
I think what you're getting at, though, is, and it sort of converges with the issue of uncertainty, is that people are desperately afraid of the uncertainty, and they want control. And so we want to be able to manipulate their environment, whether it's through magical thinking. I mean, I've had patients tell me, well, I prayed to God, and I got this message back, or my pastor told me that if I do this, I will be cured, I'll be healed, and that's bargaining. I mean, that's a non-starter, from traditional Christian standpoint. You're not going to forestall death. Eventually, that's going to come. But what it is, you want to lay yourself bare, completely open to God, so that He can actually work on your life and transform you and change you. And then this is like Saint Seraphim of Sarov, the very famous starets from Russia, the elder from Russia, who made the comment that if acquire the Holy Spirit and thousands around you will be converted. So I mean, it's this interior transformation that has to occur, and it has to be an honest one. It can't be one where I'm still in control. I can turn I make an appointment with God. I'll see you next Thursday, and then the rest of the time I do whatever I want. that's not really a relationship, a real relationship with the divine. It's just it's a makeup, it's a made up relationship. It's your imaginary friend, God, my imaginary friend, who I will call upon when I need him, or her, or whatever. I mean, it's sort of a bizarre thing, rather than kind of falling down, or like St. Thomas, when he finally encounters the risen Lord and says, my Lord and my God. I mean, none of the other disciples said that. And he said, I won't believe until I see. He is very much a 21st century kind of guy. He's very empirical. I got it. And here he has this experience. He has this very intense, real encounter with God. And of course, I think all of us have these possibilities. I mean, if you think about it, there are you're going to call them coincidences or other kinds of experiences that make no sense outside of a larger worldview than as purely material. And I think that's where a lot of there's hope, I think, for your generation, for the 21st century person, because I'll tell you, looking at all the history, especially what I was reviewing, for the writing about Father Roman, I mean, the 20th century was hell. It was crazy, whether it was totalitarian materialism or the capitalist version. I mean, it's the same. You become the slave of something, of some material object, and not the slave of God, which is what St. Paul was always aspiring to be.
I would have one last question, because we do not want to bother you too much. It is a huge opportunity for both of us, for me as a young philosophy teacher and for my student Ania as a teenager. I would have, as I said, one last question. As we already know, you are one of the most famous physicians in the United States of America. Some years ago, you have written a very interesting book entitled The Nature of Suffering, which has been translated into Romanian as well. Of course, as me as a philosopher, I'm very focused on the contemporary events, and I'm taking into account especially this era of pandemic, of coronavirus. Most of us, we are upset because maybe we do not have the same rights that we have some years ago before the upcoming of this pandemic. But in my opinion, and this is not only a philosophical approach from my side, in my opinion, we should rethink our human dimension, our existence that we have chosen by now. And maybe this is a price that we have to pay because of the mistakes we have done during the history. You have spoken about the destroying of the planet, and most of Christians, but not only Christians, but generally Christians, are participating very active to this destruction of our planet. I remember what an Austrian philosopher has said in one of his books. I mean, I'm making reference to Konrad Lorenz, a very famous Austrian philosopher who in the capital 8 Sins of Civilized Humanity, Mankind, he has made the following sentence. One moment, please. He has made the following sentence. We are guilty for the destroying of the planet because everything we are doing, because of the population, because of our industry, because of our behavior, because we don't know to be friends one to each other. And this is affected the most our planet. So my question for you is the following one, and we will need a very brief answer because the meeting will finish in 10 minutes, in less than 10 minutes. So we will need a brief answer from you. What would be your considerations regarding this era of pandemic in which we are living, how would you explain this upcoming of coronavirus, and how should we as human beings treat it?
What comes to mind is I think apparently were the last words of St. John Chrysostom when he died in exile. It was glory to God in everything. And I guess that's the question, that's the challenge for as Orthodox Christians, that we are to be thankful for everything that comes to us. And so somehow God doesn't cause, suffering, doesn't cause the pandemics, but he allows them to happen. I mean, he could easily stop it. And so it's an opportunity for us in some way to learn about ourselves and about each other. It is a challenge to us to deal also with uncertainty, as I mentioned earlier, because it's, I feel quite confident that if the death rate from the coronavirus pandemic was as severe as the Black Death was in the 14th century, where it wiped out a third of the European population, that everybody would be rushing to get vaccinated, and for example, so the vaccine wars, the discussions about vaccine and vaccination rights and so forth, these are really issues that relate to the rights of man, and so it really is something that is maybe kind of foreign, I think, to Christianity. And I will send you a copy of an article that a friend of mine, Dr. Jeffrey Bishop, who is also a physician and head of the ethics program at St. Louis University. He's an Orthodox Christian. I think you'll find it very interesting, where he is trained as a philosopher, discusses modern philosophy in light of the pandemic, but also eventually puts it in context of a Christian, of an altruistic Christian response. And that may be an opportunity that I hope we won't miss. I mean, but it's a very, I think gives you a better answer than I could. If both of you want to take a look at that article. So I'll email that to you as soon as we're done here. But I have enjoyed getting reacquainted and meeting Ania, and I look forward to preparing, I guess, for our encounter with your students in the larger sense, and probably in some kind of discussions about this interview. I hope that both of you have a blessed Feast of the Nativity and a Happy New Year, St. Basil's Day, as well as I hope you keep well and safe, as we endure more of the pandemic. And the uncertainty accompanying it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hinshaw, for your brilliant answers. Thank you, Ania, for having assisted me and for having helped me with this interview. I wish you, Dr. Hinshaw, to you and to your family, to your entire family, a happy new blessed year. And I'm sure you will have further missions in order to heal 1,000 of lives, 1,000 of people who are waiting for you, because your mission is not only a professional one, your mission is a spiritual one. And I feel I'm feeling very blessed by God, having had this opportunity to meet you directly in person, but also in this virtual world because of this new technology. And I would like to thank you again, first of all, for existing, because you have this God's word, which is much more understandable when we are listening to you. Thank you, and once again, a happy new year to you and to your entire family. Ania, if you want to add something at the end of our meeting.
Yeah, thank you as well. I'm sorry I didn't come more prepared, because this discussion has been a blessed moment. It was a very spiritual discussion, and thank you for everything you said.
Let's assume it'll be
Again,
just the beginning of a conversation.
Yes.
Hopefully, yeah. You had so many concepts entangled in your speech. I have to go back to all of them, and I'm glad I understood as much as I did. And
Yeah, I'm
I will
sorry I'm keeping you up so late.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah,
the most
because of
productive
this.
I've been in a long time.
Yeah.
Yes, it was something more than productive. Okay, thank you, Ania.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Hinshaw. Once again, a happy new year to both of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Noapte bună.
Noapte bună. Goodbye.